The budget communication is debated in Parliament throughout the month of June and approved prior to the start of the new fiscal year on July 1st. Broadly speaking, today's presentation will cover pertinent information related to the government's structural reforms, its tax plan, its economic plan, and its overall fiscal summary. At the end of the formal presentation, there will be questions from the media. As the TV broadcast is only 1 hour long, we're asking the media to please respect. There will be one question per media house during the TV broadcast. And afterwards, we will facilitate additional questions that will be live streamed on the Ministry of Finance's Facebook page, as well as the Bahamas Information Services. So without further ado, again, we welcome our TV viewing audience, our online audience, and those gathered here today to welcome the Honorable K. Peter Turnquest, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, who will be immediately followed by the Acting Financial Secretary, Mr. Marlon Johnson.
Well, good morning. What an eventful 24 hours. But I want to welcome all of you here, particularly I see all of our PSs, our permanent secretaries, all of you from the private sector as well as from the media. As Nicole said, this is our second press conference following the annual budget, and it is a feature that we want to institutionalize as we again attempt to bring this budget closer to the people so that we have full understanding and that we can clear up any of the misunderstandings that may go out as various interested parties take their spin on what has been presented in the formal communication. So yesterday I had the honor of presenting the budget communication for 2019-20, and once again it is my privilege to speak to the Bahamian people to provide more clarity and context around the new budget and to answer any questions. This budget represents a country that is in transition and a government that is in transition. We are moving from outdated, complicated, time-consuming, inconvenient ways of doing things to a more modern, efficient, fast, and creative, consumer-friendly way of operating. The type of changes we are required to make to deliver a government that is better, as a better partner to the Bahamian people, are structural in nature. And what does this mean? And take customs, for example. This means cutting out all of the paperwork, moving processes online, and reducing the roundabout time Bahamians have to spend going here, there, and everywhere just to get goods cleared. Structural changes mean we don't have to do the same things over and over just because that is the way that it's always been done. So what does this mean in the new budget, and what does this tell us about the new way of doing business? We are walking the walk. Last year, we implemented tax policies like the increase in the value-added tax with a plan in mind. 1, to pay off old bills. 2, to reduce the deficit. And 3, to provide tax relief. During the course of the year, we did exactly that, what we said we would do, and now we are doing even more. We paid off $129.6 million in old bills so far, and we budgeted for another $100 million this year. That means money in the pockets of businesses who have been stranded by the government for not paying their bills when they were in fact due. We cut the deficit dramatically this year, and our estimate for the new year is $137 million, which is the lowest deficit in 10 years. This means the government can borrow less and protect the future of young Bahamians. On tax relief, we removed the VAT on breadbasket items and medicines last year, and this year we are implementing duty reductions worth $25 million in government revenues. That includes duty-free school supplies, home refrigerators and stoves, and on all home furnishings. And this year, we are making the exemptions for value-added tax on light and water permanent. My point is that we are walking the walk. And this budget is further proof of that commitment. So what else are we doing different? This administration believes that the best kind of relief is empowerment. The minister-led government has a clear economic vision for a modern country where Bahamians are empowered and independent, free from dependency on political patronage, and free from the limiting constraints of an inefficient government bureaucracy. How are we delivering on that empowerment? By expanding opportunities in education to help break the cycle of poverty. That means $20 million to ensure Bahamians have access to free education from primary to university. And I see the president of the University of the Bahamas is here this morning with us, as well as the chairman of the Bahamas BTVI, Bahamas Technical Vocational Institute. Welcome. We are investing in entrepreneurs to build job creators. That means an increased allocation from $5 million to $8.5 million in conjunction with our partners in small businesses to give young people access to capital to pump into their businesses. We are building 21st century infrastructure as a new foundation for growth. That means $170 million invested in renewable energy over the next 10 years, with a focus on solar energy projects in the Family Islands in particular. In the medium and long term, Bahamians will save money on electricity and the cost of living will be favorably impacted. We are increasing the ease of doing business. That means no more standing in lines at the passport office, and we know that has been a sore point, for which we do offer our apologies. You will be able to renew your passports online. That means no more waiting weeks or months to renew your business license. You can get your business license in 48 hours, and we're driving that down even further. Lastly, we are leading the digital transformation to a modern government with massive investments in technological information integration. The Department of Technology is transitioning to the Department of Transformation and Digitization with an increased allocation of $15 million. And I see Ms. Roach smiling. We are serious about citizen empowerment and the way we are spending taxpayer dollars in this budget. And it is a reflection of that commitment. The best relief is empowerment. And we are doing things that are meaningful and impactful. Lastly, I want to talk about our efforts with transparency. We are doing a number of things to educate the public more about the budget and how the government is spending taxpayers' money. That includes our quarterly budget performance reporting, efforts to strengthen the Auditor General's Department, and the implementation of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Today, however, I want to share that the Ministry of Finance has developed a new budget website at bahamasbudget.gov.bs. bahamasbudget.gov.bs. The budget website will help to simplify the national budget and break it down into non-technical language. What type of information will this new website have? It will show all of the benefits in the budget for individuals and families, young people, the Family Islands, the business community, and the nation as a whole. It will show what are the priority projects that are being funded, what policy initiatives are being implemented, a snapshot of the key budget numbers in the fiscal summary, and a snapshot of ministry allocations along with other information. Starting today, you can visit bahamasbudget.gov.bs, and from the Coming Soon page, you can click to read an online version of the budget communication and download the budget tables if you wish. Next week, Monday, before the budget debate starts, the full budget website with all of the details in the new budget will be online in a user-friendly manner. The past budget will also have its own past budget website, so you can do a comparison if that is what you wish to do. The tax plan. Now I'd like to turn to the government's tax plan for the new budget. I will speak briefly about three components: tax relief, our transition to a client-centered or customer service-focused tax administration, and collection systems. I was also pleased to announce yesterday that in the 2019-2020 budget, there is no increase in value-added tax, and there are no new tax categories. Our central approach to revenue this year is about making the government more efficient and productive in the administration and collection of existing taxes, and increasing compliance by making the system more transparent and fair. We're doing a number of things to make it easier for Bahamians to interact with the tax authorities. It can feel difficult enough to simply have to pay taxes, so there's no excuse for the government making it difficult to comply, being disorganized or inefficient. That just makes Bahamians have to depend on the favor of a politician or some bureaucrat to perform simple tasks. At Customs, we are rolling out a new online system called Click to Clear that will make customs processing fast, paperless, and convenient. With real property tax, we are updating the land registry to bring about 9,000 unregistered properties into the fold so that everyone pays their fair share. We are making the system of valuing properties more transparent and data-driven. At Business License, we are allowing businesses to file their annual returns at different times during the year. For new businesses that are deemed low risk, we are providing a provisional license, valid for 90 days. That means you don't have to wait on the bureaucracy to get your business up and running. To promote tax fairness, we are streamlining all of the different tax tribunals and appeal bodies into one tax appeals commission. As a major part of our tax plan this year is getting the government's affairs cleaned up, and so that we can be better partners to the Bahamian people. Now I want to speak to direct tax relief measures. We've proposed a number of tax relief measures to provide some reprieve to all citizens and to encourage economic activity by making the imports of certain items relatively cheaper. To that end, we will at this time adjust the duty on selected frequently imported items. Generally, the focus of these reductions is around educational supplies and equipment and household implements and goods. A package of school supplies will now be duty-free. Home refrigerators and stoves of a certain size will be duty-free. Household furniture was reduced from 45% to 25%. And I apologize to all those who have WhatsApped me that they already brought in their furniture in the last month or so. Musical instruments are now duty-free, and that is going to be of tremendous benefit yesterday, as I said, to the musicians, and that is in direct response to a request from the Musicians Union. And it will benefit not only the growth of the creative sector, but also engage all of these young people who are involved in bands and community organizations as we try to steer them into positive paths. So I'm very excited about that and what that will yield in the coming years. The exemptions for VAT on water and light bills are now permanent. The package of tax reforms would have been equaled approximately $25 million in revenue. That money is going directly back into the hands of the Bahamian people in the form of savings. We do have a few new revenue items in the budget, but they're focused on capitalizing on new and expanded revenue streams from existing areas that were not in the tax fold or were outdated compared to standards international tax rates. For example, vacation rentals. VAT regulations will be enforced on vacation rentals. And this is a part of a broader initiative as we look at digital transactions and how they affect local businesses and how they affect our tax revenue. Because you can well appreciate that if a business is operating outside of the country, We have no access to them to tax them for business licenses, but they're providing services in country for which others in country are also providing service and are being subject to tax. And so it's a bit of an unfair balance. And so we are now going to ensure that anybody that is providing service within the country, they will be taxed where the benefit is derived. Boating permits, there will be fee increases on cruise permits, but they will be, there's a transition phase, and that'll come into effect in January of 2020 to ensure that we are able to educate our boaters and industry stakeholders. We will also, through the Customs Modernization Program, one feature of that program is for us to be able to allow for online cruise permits and charter fee payments so that that whole process will be more efficient. And then we expect that that is going to derive some significant revenue as we get that system up and begin the enforcement of that charter revenue that we know that we are losing at the moment. Real property tax, owner-occupied homes, the threshold for higher-end properties has been moved up from 50,000 to 50,000, to 60,000, sorry. We are also implementing new tax measures that create an equal playing field, especially between residents and non-residents, individuals and entities. New fee structures for bank and trust companies mean that there's no more onshore or offshore bank. They are just banks. And the differentiation between what was traditionally offshore versus domestic is that the offshore banks will pay a flat license fee, as will the domestic banks. But the domestic banks all banks that choose to enter into the domestic market will pay a levy that is commensurate with the cost of supervising and the risk attached to operating in Bahamian dollars and the cost of dealing in Bahamian notes and coins. By doing this, we are expanding opportunities for Bahamians to do business with international clients because we have eliminated business license on export services. And so if you're doing business in the Bahamas for clients overseas, in the past, you would have had to pay business license on all of that revenue. Now, any services that you're providing or billing for services that you provide to external clients will not be included in your business license calculation. So that is going to represent a real savings to a lot of firms. And we hope by giving that exemption that it will spur Bahamian professionals to look to export markets, to look for other jurisdictions for where they can provide services. If you just think about India, for instance, that is a big supplier of programming and coding. Well, we have a growing cadre of young professionals who are literate and computer savvy, who are learning these sophisticated programming techniques that can now offer the same services in real time, in this time zone. And those services now will not attract a business license fee here in the Bahamas. Again, under the same principle, that the tax will be collected where the benefit is derived. To conclude, I hope I've painted a picture of a budget that sets the Bahamas on a new course of government efficiency and productivity, and growth and opportunity for Bahamians. This budget stands for a government that is a better partner to the Bahamian people. We are transforming our execution and service delivery so we can provide Bahamians with better results. We are refocusing our spending so we can provide Bahamians with better benefits, both today and long term. Not the type of benefits in the past that have increased the dependence of citizens on the government, but the type of benefits that allow Bahamians to be empowered and truly independent. For too long, the government has used taxpayers' money to feed a culture of political largesse and government inefficiency, to put band-aids over structural problems that undermine the government's ability to play its true role. This budget invests in comprehensive structural reforms that are going to make the government work better and be better. From ease of doing business to the digital transformation, from the focus on tax fairness and the overhaul of revenue administration and collection, from the adoption of transparent and accountable fiscal practices to the overhaul of state-owned enterprises. This budget invests in strategic projects and programs that are going to build 21st century infrastructure and set a new foundation for growth that will make education more inclusive and help Bahamians to break the cycle of poverty. The work this budget will enable us to do is meaningful and substantive, although gritty and often unrewarding. But it will make the Bahamian government a better partner to the Bahamian people. Thank you.
Hi, well, good morning, fellow permanent secretaries, president, chairman, members of the press. Good morning. I'll go very briefly to sort of give you an overview of the budget by the numbers to sort of give you a feel for what is projected and how that contrasts for where we expect to end up this fiscal period. So it's a very, very simple table that you see before you, and it speaks to what we anticipate that we will end up at the end of June, at the end of the fiscal year, against what's being budgeted. And I remind you that these numbers are projected, so you will see some change after the June report. I also want to point out that this is a good time for me to point out, that our final quarterly report, as we indicated in our previous quarterly report, would be at the end of August, because we have the end of year items to clean up and to make sure that it's set. So normally we produce our quarterly report at the end of the ensuing month, but our final report, as we would have pointed out in the previous report, will be at the end of August. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that, and that we're still on target for producing our quarterly reports, but that there will be some divergence in the timing. So, but the numbers are projected, and again, the final numbers will come in. We will report those in our final quarterly report and also in our fiscal strategy report that will be released in November. One of the things, again, if you take this number that's projected and you contrast it with what was budgeted, you'll see that for almost every category, the figures are lower. So one of the things that you will see if you look at the budget is that the allocations for the upcoming budget year are in many respects lower than the allocations were for the current budget year. However, what's important to note is that if you look in particular, and I'll come back to revenue at the end, but if you look at all the expenditure line items, the budget for this upcoming year is higher than where we anticipate the expenditure to end up. So that even though the allocations are down, the truth of the matter is that more monies are being budgeted that are projected to be spent last year. For recurrent expenditure, we project that will come in at around $2.435 billion, and next year the budget is for $2.530 billion. That's an increase of just over $90 million. For capital, we anticipate we'll end the year at around $207 million, and the budget for the upcoming fiscal period is $235 million, which again is an increase. So I just want that, it's important to have that folks understand that. Where we have the most significant jump, you can go to the next slide, is in revenue. And revenue, we anticipate a growth of over $200 million. And there's some reasons for that. First of all, this year will be the first year where we have the full effect of the 12%, of the increase in VAT to 12%. And what that means is that for July of this year, the receipts the government would have gotten would have been at the old 7.5% rate. Also, as you would be aware, the government made accommodation for the hospitality industry as well as the construction industry. And so for the first 6 months of the year, a lot of their forward advance bookings or existing projects were booked at the old 7.5% rate. All of that now washes. In this new month, we will have the impact of the gaming adjustment, which would bring in, we anticipate, some additional $20 million over and above what would have been budgeted prior. And the impact of that, again, will be felt. And in particular, we're looking at the impact of the Revenue Enhancement Unit. As the Deputy Prime Minister indicated yesterday, the recruitment for that new unit is almost complete. And that unit is what we would call the tip of the spear. The unit would work straight with the Ministry of Finance, through the Ministry of Finance. It's a cross-agency unit that will do a lot of analytics and really go after what we believe to be considerable headroom in the ability to collect tax. So we sort of know anecdotally, and I'm sure a lot of you heard stories about taxes not being collected. So this unit will work together with existing agencies, with customs, with the DIR unit, and do independent investigations. And we anticipate, just based on the intelligence we have, that there's tremendous opportunity to close some of the loops. As the DPM also said, we will be implementing the electronic single window. And by doing so, through customs, the Click to Clear project, by streamlining that entire process, a business or a person will be able to sit at home and be able to do the entire customs clearing process without having to go in anywhere. And that's straight from booking it to paying for it. And naturally, when you're able to skip a lot of the lines, you're really able to capture a lot of the revenues that otherwise you would not have been able to get. It would allow for the closing of a lot of loopholes. So we are confident that those activities will generate substantial revenue, and that our revenue numbers will be substantially increased. Not to mention the economy is still poised to grow. We're anticipating growth rates in the somewhere between 1.8% and 2.2% in 2019. And I think we see evidence of that with the continued buoyancy in the tourism sector and the continuing economic activity. So those things combined, we believe, will drive revenue up. The other key thing that we have done and will continue to do is look at cost containment. As I showed you in the previous slide, you will see a number of instances where we believe that there was over budgeting in a lot of line items, or the budgets were not quite tuned to where the expenditure needs are. So we'll continue to work with agencies. My permanent secretary, Collegia, could tell you that I'm consistently speaking to what we can do and what we ought to be doing as far as cost containment, and we will have much more of those sorts of discussions. We also meet, and we've begun meeting with the agencies on a monthly basis from a budgetary standpoint to review their budgetary pressures and also to find out from them where there are needs for adjustments. So it isn't a punitive exercise, an exercise where we're seeking to be, Ministry of Finance is seeking to lord over what they do, but to really get a sense of where the real true needs are and what we could do differently in order to allow all of the agencies of government to meet their mandates. Clearly, the fiscal responsibility legislation and the Fiscal Responsibility Act require that the government meet certain deficit targets, so our orientation has to change. Without those restrictions, pretty much Parliament and its governments could submit a budget with any particular deficit number. With fiscal responsibility legislation, the way in which that is done is a lot different. So that if the government wishes to diverge from the fiscal targets that have been established, there's a process that the government would have to go through. And so that's created a whole lot of discipline, and we as the public servants now have the challenge of figuring how we do things differently to make that happen. And so we will continue to do that. As the Deputy Prime Minister would have said, we've engaged a new cadre of accountants. We have 35 accountants. Some of them will start in a few months, and the others will be recruited over several months. And that higher level of accountancy, higher level of oversight, we believe, will also help us in the budget monitoring and actually allow us really to target monies appropriately and to best purpose. So with that, I close my comments, and I'll turn it over now to Noel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those two presentations. So we're going to move very swiftly on to fielding questions from the media. And we do have, it seems, some good time. So we will just manage time as best as possible, still with one question from each media house at a time. If you could come to the microphone to ask your question, and then you can identify who you'd like to direct that question to.
Good morning. Fern Carey from ZNS. Given the revenue shortfall and some of the challenges in collecting revenue, will there be a push towards prosecution for persons who are not compliant? And that's for the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you.
Give me the easy question, right?
Take it out. Take it out.
So, the short answer is yes. We do intend to collect the government's revenue. For a number of years and for a number of reasons, we have been relatively lax, some may say slack, in the enforcement of the tax laws. And that it has had its effect on overall results and the buildup of all the arrears and all the debt that we have. Each of us as citizens have an obligation to pay our fair share. We do not have a progressive tax system, and so that requires that those of us who have an obligation, and particularly those of us who have more, and you'd be surprised at the class of people that don't pay their taxes. It's not the poor people. Poor people, vulnerable people pay their taxes. It's normally upon the high end people who can traditionally afford to pay that don't pay. And so we are going to enforce the law that are on the book. Again, this is not a punitive exercise. This is not a gotcha exercise. This is a very much a partnership where the government does its part, the citizens do their part, and together we get the positive result from each of us following the rules that we anticipate and need as a society.
Good morning, Jasmine Brown from R News. My question is basically a follow-up to Fern's. The revenue shortfall last year was about $240 million. I heard you say just now, it's been some slackness with tax collection, but what can you do to assure the Bahamian people that we won't have a revenue shortfall this year? I know we say that we are going to have some tough talk, people are going to be maybe prosecuted, but what can you do? Because VAT has gone up. People are paying, some people are paying, but why should we believe that we'll meet our targets?
So one of the things that I think is fundamental is that GDP growth projections are exactly that. They're projections. And unless you've got a crystal ball that's a little better than my crystal ball, it is very difficult to pinpoint a number. We make these projections based upon factors that we are aware in the global economy, that are happening in our marketplace with our major sectors of our economy, and based upon the plans and the investments that we are aware of. Any number of factors can affect and slow down that growth profile. In this particular year, you would have listened to me yesterday when I talked about the global slowdown in GDP growth. And the IMF has pulled back their global growth forecast for 2018 and 2019, which they expect to pick up in the second half of the year. Well, that has an effect. Now, in the Bahamas, we have been benefiting from a very robust tourism sector, and that is driving the growth for the most part. But one of the things that I am particularly proud of in this last growth report, or GDP report, is the fact that the growth that we've had has been private sector led. What we have done with respect to government spending in the past, and when you hear people say throw money on the ground and those kind of things, you're talking about an artificial GDP growth. What we've seen in the last year is primarily driven by the private sector, which is real and sustainable growth. And the government's role is to come behind and to make sure that we support that growth and that we put in place the infrastructure that will make sure that it is sustainable growth. Add to that the foreign direct investment that comes along to help us to expand the overall economy. So again, GDP growth is a factor of a number of things. It's not only internal economic factors, but also external economic factors, and they all play a role in achieving a result or not. The main thing, though, is to look at that bottom line. And this year, when you look at that deficit number, we're coming in at our target, which means that we are doing a fair job in managing the fiscal affairs of this country.
Yeah, I was just going to add to the same point that the DPM made as he closed his comments, is that the job of fiscal management is managing the deficit. The budgetary revenue projections are just that, they're just revenue projections. And if you look historically, not only in the Bahamas, but very few countries hit their revenue targets. They're either over, they're under, but hitting it it's part art and part science. And because there's so many factors involved. But what all governments are challenged with, and all governments have the responsibility, is managing the actual outturn, your deficit, your balance, your surplus. And that is the focus. And so what part of the work we have been doing with agencies is to manage the explosion in expenditure growth, because that's what you can manage within the year. And so, and that will always be the formula for containing it. So, you know, I see the headline about missing the revenue target, and that is something important. But what really ultimately is important is making sure that you meet your fiscal goals in respect to your deficit targets, your debt targets and the like, because that really is the determinant of fiscal stability and fiscal success.
Good morning, gentlemen. Chester Robards from the Guardian Business. Were any of the decisions made for the 2019-2020 budget made with WTO accession in mind? We see some VAT removal on the export of services, which seems to be aligned with what we want to do when we move toward WTO accession. And if not, when can we see some of those changes begin to be made? Thank you.
Well, as was said in the fiscal strategy report, you know, one of the things that I invite everybody to go back is to take a look at the fiscal strategy report that laid out the government's plan over 3 years. In that would have been reference to the anticipated WTO accession and how that works. In the government's WTO offer, which is again a public document, you would have seen that the government intends to bring down the tariffs and the customs duties by an average of 15%, which turns out to about $50 million in foregone revenue. More than that, the government would have committed over 3 years to bring down the duties and customs duty by $100 million, which is double the projection for the WTO. So yes, the short answer is that the overarching picture looks at the context of WTO accession, but the more ambitious target is what the government would have committed to in its policy documents of changing the balance between duties and value-added tax and other taxes. Driving that again is the more expensive that goods and commodities are in the economy, the more potential drag that would have, particularly on people of lesser means. So the government strategy is to try to rebalance that, rebalance the share of tax between services and goods. And so as an operating policy, the notion is to bring down duties to make goods more affordable. So, and so the reductions you saw was the $25 million was starting to move towards the government's target of $100 million in duty reductions, more so than with the WTO. But of course, that's part of the context too, because that we're moving in line with whatever the WTO offer would have been. But outside of that, I think you would have seen the same measure of duty adjustments for economic reasons.
Good morning, Morgan Adderley from the Tribune. Yesterday, the leader of the opposition questioned the functionality of the e-procurement and supplier registry system, specifically whether or not the general public or most vendors are being educated in how to use this system. Any response to that?
Well, again, this is a process that we're still engaged in the registration process, and I think, I can't remember the number of vendors that have been registered, but there has been several sessions to educate the suppliers on the use of the system and how to get registered. As we bring the legislation to Parliament, which we hope will be in the next couple of months, then we will ramp up that whole process to ensure that not only the vendors know how to use it and to benefit from it, but also that the public at large can view it and hold us accountable to what we say that the system will produce and the benefits that it will be derived to the Bahamian people going forward. So this is very much a work in progress.
Good morning, Sloan Smith, Nassau Guardian. DPM, upon coming to office, you would have noted that the previous Christie administration would have left behind several bills, several unaccounted accounts. My question is, has the Ministry of Finance managed to get these accounts in order, or are you still finding these outstanding bills?
we are unfortunately still paying bills. In last year's budget, we indicated there was roughly $360 million of arrears that we were intending to address over the next 3 years. We had budgeted $172 million for this current fiscal year, and we've addressed 129, I believe it is, $129 million of that to date, and we will see where we get to through the end of the year. And then in the upcoming year, we've budgeted another $100 million to address another $100 million of that. And then in the next year, we'll address the balance. The idea is that over the next 3-year period, we will liquidate all of those arrears. And that means that that is money now that is freed up for us to give back to the Bahamian people in the way of further duty reductions, in the way of new programs to stimulate economic activity on the one hand, build infrastructure, and to provide the social support that we need to ensure that we have healthy and wholesome communities.
Good morning. Considering the input from the Musicians Union, I just want to know how the government came up with a list for the tax relief. Leah Cooper, JCN.
The plea that was made was just for all instruments, for the industry as a whole, to support the industry, because again, we have a number of, I want to say, frustrated musicians in this community, and we are a talented people, but you know, over the years, and those of us who've been around long enough would have seen the decline in the number of native shows and native clubs that exist. And a part of it is just, one, the cost involved in providing the instruments and the venues that are necessary. It's also a part of a failure on the part of government to ensure that these creative people are included in the mix, in the discussion, as we look at touristic developments. And so in addition to providing relief with respect to instruments, we're also talking with our investors, particularly in the tourism sector, in their heads of agreement to see how we can incorporate creatives into their obligations. Because again, this is an area where we believe that we can define ourselves, where we can offer a value that is not available anywhere else. It defines who we are and brings the whole experience home to people in a more real way that will hopefully spur them to come back and to experience more. So hopefully with this initiative, we'll be able to inspire more musicians to get into the industry and to provide more opportunity for them to express their creative skills.
So you'd ask also how we came up with the rest of the task list, and the policy direction that we would have gotten is to try to find within the commonly imported items, those things would be most impactful for what we call sort of ordinary Bahamians, the person on the street. And so looking at it, as we defined the commonly imported items, we saw that there was still some potential for duty reduction around school supplies, given that, you know, many of us have kids or have had small kids, and so we know what going back to school, what that cost is like. So school supplies was a natural category as we look through it, because those are commonly imported items. And of course, household goods and furniture, because of course, anybody who has had to build or outfit a house knows the expense involved in that. And if, as the government's policy is to encourage more home ownership and cater to that, then the target home furnishings, pots and pans were natural, as well as the smaller refrigerators and stoves, which again would be an advantage to persons of modest means. So that really was how the list was looked together. What are those kinds of things, based on the policy directive we got, that could help impact as many people as possible?
Morning, Natario McKinsey, Tribune Business. DPM, you had mentioned yesterday in your budget presentation that there had been you guys had found over budgeting with regards to personal emoluments. I just wanted to find out how you're addressing that. I think you have to clean up the register and how much could be freed up for other allocations.
So again, this is an ongoing exercise for us because what we found is that the budgeting system that we've inherited is very, very inefficient, and it has not been very scientific, if I may use that term. And so as we go through line items, comparing the actual expenditure and the known commitments, we adjust the allocations accordingly. So I don't know what the difference was, but whatever savings that are derived are either eliminated or reallocated. At the end of the day, the important thing to note is that there is no headcount cuts, and it does not stop ministries and agencies from hiring the talent that they need in order to ensure that they remain efficient and service the Bahamian people as they need.
So how that fits into the budget is that you will see in the current budget, and I'm glad you bring up the question because it's one of those questions that it's a good question, in that the allocations for salary in this upcoming budget, 1920, is lower in a lot of agencies than it was the year before. So the natural impression it could be that means lower head count and people go in, but that isn't the case. A lot of that was budgeted sums that weren't necessary. So if you calculate, because the budget has in it sort of the 9-month trend or the 10-month trend, and you extrapolate it out, you will see that there is sufficient monies in the budget to cover both the head counts, any incremental payments that are due, and certainly there is an allocation within the Ministry of Public Service and in certain agencies to bring on additional talent as required in the agencies. So, but that's what would have been done. Allocations would have been reduced, or as the DPM said, been reallocated.
I just wanted to also find out, I know you guys are looking at generating some revenue from the cruising permit fees and that sort of thing. Just wanted to get an idea what projections you're looking at in that regard.
It's hard to say because, quite frankly, we've been missing what we think and what the industry tells us is a significant amount of revenue. We know that there are vessels in the Bahamas that are cruising throughout, and you can just go to Exuma or go to Abaco. Even here, you see them off the shore of Nassau, parked out or just anchored, moored off. That are not registered, may not have even cleared. We know that there are facilitators in the U.S. that are selling charters. Those charter boats, some of them are here and not declaring that they're actually doing charters from the Bahamas. There are others that are coming over from the U.S., particularly in Bimini, this is a problem, come over for the day and engage in fishing and whatever, and don't declare that they're actually on a charter. And we're missing all of that revenue. The estimates have been anywhere from $20 to $50 million. Honestly, we really don't know. But what we have built is a system that is going to track traffic, marine traffic, and that is going to be able to tell us who has paid and who has not paid. And we're going to be able to, or the software is going to be able to make it efficient for people to register and to pay. And so hopefully that will drive natural compliance and we'll derive the kind of revenue that we anticipate.
Good morning again. You mentioned yesterday, DPM, a burden that we have with BTC still. Could you kind of elaborate on that and why we still have that, why we have to pay that? And it seems to be a long-term burden from which you say we're going to be paying off. Could you just elaborate more on that, please?
I'll leave that to the technical guy.
So as part of the agreement with the cable and wireless and the government, was to fill what would have then been defined as I think it was a $39 million deficit in the pension. And so that was part of the shareholders' agreement, was that the government would cover that cost. And to put it, as the DPM said yesterday, to put it as succinctly as possible, it was never funded. So that pension liability continues to build and to grow. It was like the DPM said, how we discover things even when you asked about the old bills. It's one of those things as we get information, it became known to us during this fiscal year. So we have been in discussions with the government representatives of the board through BTC to figure out how that matter would be addressed. An allocation of $3 million was put in the budget to start to pay down on it, but the bill is still there, and so we will use this year to really do the proper actuarial analysis and cash flow analysis to determine how that obligation needs to be filled going forward. So that's yet again, over and above the $360 million, that wasn't included in that. That's another, quote, $40 million or so that, an unfunded liability that will now have to be addressed.
Morning, gentlemen. Altaviz Munnings from ZNS. With the permanent secretaries here, gentlemen, I wanted to know, does the government in this new budget, or if you can project for future budgets, will have enough funds to ensure that they have the money that they need to make sure that their ministries are run properly? Because I know also that there are a lot of people who are looking for, nobody did. I remember during the last budget communication, sir, you mentioned that the ministries had to streamline by 10%. Did that work? And would you need to ask the permanent secretaries to do that again? And is the government ready to hire more people for the public service to ensure that the government's operation is facilitated? You're welcome.
So I'll take the first cut. So the last question first. Yes, I think the results of this year has shown the discipline that the permanent secretaries, ministries, agencies have exercised over the last year, and they've done their part to meet the mandate that we gave them. And certainly, we want to thank them for their expertise and professionalism in dealing with that. Second question: yes, as we mentioned earlier, there is room in the budget to hire those persons that are needed to ensure that we fulfill our commitments to the Bahamian people. There will be no sacrifice in that. As well as to ensure that there are promotions and whatever other implements or increments, that are due, that those commitments are met. As respect to this year's budget, the permanent secretaries will tell you that there's never enough money. And they will also tell you that submissions that they put forth would have been, to use our words, surgically adjusted to meet the realities of our constraints. And the reality is that the Bahamian economy, the Bahamian people, can only contribute so much. And so we have to work our plan within that constraint. And so we do our best to ensure that we allocate and meet our fixed commitments. And then we look at programs after that to ensure that they meet the government's priorities in the first instance, and secondly, the ministry's priorities. So the short answer is that they didn't get everything that they want, but hopefully they got what they need.
I would only add to that very quickly that one of the discussions we've had before, and I certainly just very recently with the acting Secretary of Cabinet, is us as civil servants have to take a different tack. We still utilize a very archaic paper-based way of doing things. And I haven't done an actual empirical study on this, but I would hazard about 10% of our costs easily is just in moving paper around. We have paper-based registries where files go. We have to, when I write a memo, someone has to sign it out in a blue book, then it has to go to a registry where they have to sign it in a blue book, and then they have to put it in the envelope, and then it has to go in the messenger's car to go across the street. And I always joked that when I came into the service, back in September 2017, I was still getting written memos inviting me to meetings when we have a feature in the email that does that. And imagine just that cost of moving paper around, which is totally unnecessary when we have email, and which nobody else in the world pretty much does anymore. So, and the reason that never changed was because we as public servants were never compelled to do it any differently. If this was a private business, I mean, I came from the private sector, so when I walked in, I screamed, because I just could not believe that we were still doing business this way in 2017. It was alien to me. I say all of that to say that as colleagues, we've talked about this, and we've collectively, and I could say this, that my colleagues have also embraced this, taking on the challenge of really changing how we do business. And in so doing, we will find that we can do a lot more with the same resources.
Well, we'd like to thank all of the media for their questions. We did have one question coming from our online audience, which I'll just pose the question, but we won't have time to answer it on the broadcast. However, Zeneca Bartlett would like you to speak about whether the revenue shortfall is only as a result, or was it as a result of challenges around collecting VAT. So we're going to table that answer for after the TV broadcast. But for the time being, I would just like to thank our viewing audience for tuning in to the budget press conference, of an event that we are going to have annually to help to educate the public about the national budget. The Ministry of Finance will continue to engage in other activities to engage the public and to help to spread education around the budget this year and just the budget in general. So I would like to thank the Honorable K. Peter Turnquest, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, for his presentation. I'd like to thank the Acting Financial Secretary, Mr. Marlon Johnson, and all of the permanent secretaries, the deputy permanent secretaries, and other heads of departments and directors who are present with us, and in particular our online audience and our TV audience. We thank you very much for participating, and you can find other information about the budget online at bahamasbudget.gov.bs when it goes live next week at the start of the budget debate. Thank you very much.
So first off, I just want to say to the permanent secretaries or to remind them that this will be an annual feature of our budget program. And as we go forward next year, we would certainly like you to ensure that you bring your heads of departments and your managers so that we're all on the same page and we can give them all the message one time and we all go forward together with a common understanding. And so I'd just like to give that message. Secondly, with respect to the question online about VAT collections, VAT collections are up, I think it's 16% year on year. And we have not had any significant decrease in the compliance rate. In fact, if I remember the last report I saw, there was actually an increase in the compliance rate, those persons who are actually paying the value-added tax that is due. So it is not a function of that. I think it really is the underperformance or having not collected the total amount of VAT that we had projected is primarily a factor of the fact that we gave some concessions at the beginning of the fiscal year to account for a transition for hotels that already booked vacation stays and for contracts with contractors who had already booked on a set price. And so that would have had more of an effect than anything to do with compliance.
Well, thank you very much. And with that, we are going to end our live stream online. Again, we thank our followers on the Ministry of Finance Facebook page, those who are tuning in from the BIS Facebook page, and we ask that you continue to follow us via social media and all the different channels that we will be engaging with the public. Thank you again, and have a great day.